The mop clattered against Italian marble. 11:47 at night. Ray should have been alone on the executive floor. Instead, he found Brooke Callahan, the CEO whose signature controlled his paycheck, crumpled against the floor-to-ceiling window like a puppet with severed strings. The city glittered behind her, $50 million of view, and she sat in a $3,000 dress, mascara bleeding down porcelain cheeks, staring at nothing. Their eyes met. The universe forgot about job titles. "Penthouse's echo," she whispered. "When no one's waiting." Ray heard himself speak before thinking, "My place is small, but my daughter's laughter fills every corner." He smiled, the reckless smile of a man who'd already crossed the line. "You could just move in." She didn't laugh. 23 hours later, his doorbell rang. The most powerful woman in the city stood on his cracked porch, suitcase in hand. "You said there was room." What followed would shatter everything he believed about love and the walls between worlds. Ray Hollister had been invisible for 7 years. 7 years of mopping floors that cost more than his annual salary. 7 years of fixing air conditioning units while executives walked past without a glance, their Italian leather shoes clicking against marble he'd just polished. He'd learned to appreciate the invisibility. It meant no one questioned why a 42-year-old man with calloused hands and a perpetually tired smile worked the night shift in one of the most prestigious buildings in the city. It meant no one asked about the photograph tucked in his wallet, a little girl with his eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, waiting at home with a babysitter who charged by the hour. The Callahan building rose 47 stories into the night sky, a monument to ambition and old money. Ray knew every inch of it. He knew which elevator made a grinding sound on the 32nd floor. He knew that the conference room on 15 always smelled faintly of cigars, despite the building's strict no-smoking policy. He knew that the executive floor, the 47th, was supposed to be empty after 9 o'clock, when the last assistant gathered her things and the cleaning crew finished their rounds. That's why he saved it for last. The silence up there felt different, heavier, like the air itself knew it was breathing rarefied space. Tonight, the silence was wrong. Ray stepped off the service elevator, mop bucket rattling against the polished floor, and froze. Light spilled from the corner office, the office with the nameplate that read, "Brooke Callahan, Chief Executive Officer," in letters that probably cost more than his truck. In 7 years, he'd never seen that light on past 10. He checked his watch. 11:43. The smart thing would be to turn around, come back later, pretend he'd never noticed. But something in the quality of that light, dim, almost defeated, made him push his cart forward, the wheels squeaking softly against marble that reflected the city lights like a mirror. The door was open. Not all the way, just enough to suggest that whoever was inside had stopped caring about boundaries. Ray paused at the threshold, his hand on the mop handle, and that's when he saw her. Brooke Callahan, the woman whose face graced the covers of business magazines, whose signature on his paycheck kept Penny in shoes that fit and food that wasn't ramen. She sat crumpled against the floor-to-ceiling window, like something broken. Her shoes lay discarded beside her, those red-soled heels that cost more than his monthly rent. Her hair, usually immaculate, fell in disheveled waves around her face, and her eyes, God, those eyes stared at nothing, reflecting the $50 million view she probably couldn't even see. The mop handle slipped from Ray's fingers and clattered against the marble. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Brooke's head snapped up, and for one terrible moment, they stared at each other across a distance far greater than the 20 feet of polished floor between them. He saw her register his uniform, the maintenance badge, the weathered face of a man who'd learned to expect nothing. He waited for the dismissal, the curt nod, the pointed silence that would remind him of his place. Instead, something in her expression crumbled. "I'm sorry," Ray said, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. His presence, her pain, the vast, unbridgeable gap between their worlds. "I didn't know anyone was still here. I can come back." He bent to retrieve his mop, already calculating how long he'd need to wait before the floor would be empty again. but her voice stopped him rough, as if she'd been crying or screaming, or both. "Do you know what the funny thing about penthouses is?" Ray straightened slowly. In 7 years, Brooke Callahan had never spoken to him directly. He wasn't even sure she knew his name, despite the badge pinned to his chest. "Ma'am?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just exhaustion. They echo. Every room, every hallway. Footsteps bouncing off designer furniture that no one ever sits on. She pressed her palm against the glass, leaving a smudge that Ray knew he'd have to clean later. "I have 4,000 square feet and 12 rooms, and the only sound I hear when I come home is my own breathing." Ray should have nodded politely, should have mumbled something appropriate and backed away, returned to his invisible existence where CEOs didn't share their loneliness with the maintenance staff. But Penny had been asking about loneliness lately, why some kids at school had moms and she didn't, why their apartment felt different from other people's houses. He'd been struggling to find the words to explain that loneliness wasn't about square footage or designer furniture. It was about the spaces between heartbeats, the silence after laughter faded. "My place is small," he heard himself say, and immediately wanted to take it back. What was he doing? But the words kept coming, tumbling out like they'd been waiting 7 years for this moment. 800 square feet, 2 bedrooms. If you count the closet I converted when my daughter outgrew her crib. The pipes rattle in winter, and the neighbors play music too loud on weekends. Brooke was watching him now, really watching, and Ray felt like one of those insects pinned under glass in a museum display. He should stop talking. He should definitely stop talking. "But my daughter's laughter fills every corner," he continued, because apparently his mouth had declared independence from his brain. "And the coffee's always warm, and there's a dent in the couch from where we sit together every night to read stories." He smiled, the reckless smile of a man who'd already crossed a line he hadn't known existed. "You could just move in." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible. Ray waited for security to materialize, for lawyers to descend, for the earth to open up and swallow him whole for having the audacity to joke with a woman who could buy his entire apartment building without checking her bank balance. Brooke didn't laugh. She didn't call security. She just looked at him with those exhausted eyes, and something flickered in their depths, something that might have been curiosity, or recognition, or the desperate hope of a drowning woman who'd just spotted land. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ray," he said. "Ray Hollister." She nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. "Ray Hollister," she repeated. "The man who offers his home to strangers." "You're not a stranger," he said, then immediately regretted it. Of course she was a stranger. She was the most famous stranger in the building. "I mean, I know who you are. Everyone does. Everyone knows Brooke Callahan, CEO." She turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly against the city lights. "Nobody knows Brooke." Ray didn't have an answer for that. He picked up his mop, returned it to the bucket, and prepared to retreat to the safety of invisibility. "I'll let you have your privacy," he said. "I can finish the floor tomorrow. Ray." Her voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you for the offer." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak again, and pushed his cart toward the elevator. The doors closed behind him, and he leaned against the wall, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What had he been thinking? You could just move in, the most ridiculous thing he'd ever said. By tomorrow, it would be a story Brooke Callahan told at cocktail parties, the maintenance man who'd offered her a room in his cramped apartment. Ray pushed the thought away and focused on getting home. Penny would be asleep by now, but he'd peek into her room anyway, watch her chest rise and fall, remind himself why he worked nights in a building that made him feel like a ghost. 23 hours later, Ray was standing in his kitchen, stirring a pot of macaroni and cheese while Penny sat at the table, tongue poking out in concentration as she colored a picture of a house. Not their apartment, a proper house, with a yard and a chimney and smoke curling up toward a smiling sun. She'd been drawing houses a lot lately. Ray tried not to read too much into it. "Daddy, how do you spell beautiful?" Penny asked, not looking up from her masterpiece. Beautiful, Ray said automatically. What are you writing? It's for my teacher, she said. Our homework is to draw our dream home. Ray stirred the macaroni more vigorously than necessary. And what's your dream home look like, baby girl? Penny held up her picture. A 2-story house with purple shutters, a garden full of flowers that looked more like colorful blobs, and 2 stick figures in the window, one tall, one short. It has a room just for my books, she said, and a kitchen where we can bake cookies. And the doorbell rang. Ray frowned. They never got visitors. His mother lived 3 states away. His friends from before the divorce, before Maggie left, before his life became a careful choreography of survival had slowly drifted into memory. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and crossed to the door. Penny, trailing behind him with her crayon still clutched in her fist. He opened the door, and the world tilted sideways. Brooke Callahan stood on his cracked concrete porch, a designer suitcase at her feet, wearing jeans and a simple white blouse that probably cost more than his car. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no armor. She looked younger like this, vulnerable, human. You said there was room, she said. Ray opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Behind him, Penny tugged at his shirt. Daddy, who's that? Ray's brain finally caught up with reality. Miss Callahan. What are you? How did you? You're in the employee database, Brooke said, as if showing up at a maintenance worker's apartment with luggage was a perfectly normal occurrence. I need a place to stay. You offered. I was joking, Ray heard himself say, though his voice sounded far away. I know. She picked up her suitcase. Were you serious about the coffee being warm? Ray stared at her. Brooke Callahan, CEO of a billion-dollar company, was asking about his coffee, standing on his porch. With a suitcase, the universe had clearly lost its mind. My penthouse caught fire last night, Brooke said, and something in her voice cracked. Electrical fault. The whole place is... She stopped, swallowed hard. Gone. Everything's gone. Ray's shock transformed into something else. He'd seen that look before in the mirror, the day Maggie left, the day the divorce papers arrived, the look of someone whose foundation had just crumbled. The hotels are surrounded by reporters, Brooke continued. Every place I could go, they'd find me. They're already writing stories. CEO homeless after penthouse blaze. I needed somewhere no one would think to look. And you thought of me. It wasn't a question. Brooke met his eyes. You offered me warmth. No one's done that in a very long time. Penny pushed past Ray's legs, looking up at the strange woman with undisguised curiosity. Are you sleeping over? She asked. We have macaroni and cheese. Daddy makes the best macaroni and cheese. Something shifted in Brooke's face, a softening that Ray hadn't seen in the hard-edged CEO who signed his paychecks. I'd like that, she said quietly. If it's okay with your daddy. Ray looked at his daughter, then at the most powerful woman in the city, then at the pot of macaroni and cheese bubbling away on his stove. He thought about propriety, about what the neighbors would say, about every reason this was a terrible idea. Then he stepped aside and held the door open. Welcome to our home, Miss Callahan. The first week was chaos. Brooke Callahan had never cooked a meal in her life, a fact that became painfully clear when she attempted to make scrambled eggs and somehow set off every smoke detector in the building. She'd never used a washing machine, leading to a memorable incident involving a cashmere sweater, hot water, and a garment that emerged small enough to fit a doll. She didn't know how to fold sheets. She'd never mopped a floor, which struck Ray as darkly ironic, given that he mopped floors for a living. You've really never cleaned anything? Ray asked on day 3, watching Brooke stare at a vacuum cleaner like it was an alien artifact. I had staff, Brooke said, and for the first time she sounded embarrassed. Since I was a child, there was always someone to handle things. Must be nice. Ray didn't mean for the bitterness to seep through, but it did anyway. Brooke looked at him sharply. It's efficient, she said. It's not nice. Nice is sitting down to dinner with your daughter and asking about her day. Nice is reading bedtime stories and knowing someone's waiting for you when you come home. She gestured around the small apartment, the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, the pile of shoes by the door, the worn couch with its telltale dent. This is nice, Ray. What I had was curated. The apartment wasn't designed for 3 people. Brooke slept on the couch, insisting that she wouldn't take Penny's room despite Ray's offers. She woke each morning with a crick in her neck and lines from the cushions pressed into her cheek, and somehow she looked more alive than she had in that corner office. Penny adored her. Within days, the little girl was dragging Brooke into elaborate games of pretend, teaching her the rules of tea parties and the proper way to address stuffed animals. Ray would come home from his shift to find them huddled together on the floor, building block towers or coloring pictures or watching cartoons with matching expressions of concentration. She never had children, Ray's neighbor Mrs. Patterson said one afternoon, peering at Brooke through the window as she helped Penny water the single-potted plant on the balcony. I read it in a magazine. Married to her job, they said. Ray didn't respond. He'd learned that Mrs. Patterson's curiosity was best left unfed, but he couldn't help noticing the way Brooke's hand trembled slightly when Penny reached for her, the way she sometimes looked at the little girl with an expression of such raw longing that Ray had to turn away. There was a story there, a wound that hadn't healed. He didn't ask. Some doors were meant to stay closed until the person inside chose to open them. At work, the whispers started almost immediately. Ray and Brooke arrived at the building within minutes of each other. One morning, a coincidence that set the rumor mill spinning. Did you see them? He overheard a security guard say to another. Came from the same direction. You think they're... Ray walked faster, head down, heart hammering. He'd known this was a risk. A single dad and a CEO, living under the same roof. It didn't matter that the arrangement was innocent. It didn't matter that the closest he'd come to touching Brooke was when their fingers brushed, passing the salt. People saw what they wanted to see. And what they wanted to see was scandal. The summons came on a Tuesday. Ray was called to the Human Resources office, where a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper smile informed him that there had been concerns raised about his relationship with Miss Callahan. We have a strict policy against fraternization between executives and staff, she said, her tone making it clear that fraternization was the polite version of what she was implying. I'm not fraternizing with anyone, Ray said. Miss Callahan is a guest in my home, temporarily. The HR woman's smile widened. Mr. Hollister, you understand that your position here is contingent on maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. If it were to become public that one of our maintenance staff was hosting our CEO, the optics would be... The optics? Ray felt something hot rise in his chest. A woman's home burned down. She needed a place to stay. I offered. That's it. Nevertheless, the word hung in the air like a guillotine. Consider this a warning. Ray didn't tell Brooke about the meeting. She had enough to deal with insurance paperwork, board meetings conducted via phone from his cramped living room, the slow process of rebuilding a life from ashes. But she noticed anyway. Something's wrong, she said that evening, watching him push pasta around his plate. Penny had already finished eating and retreated to her room to play. You've been quiet all day. Just tired, Ray. She reached across the table and touched his hand the first time she'd initiated contact since arriving. Her fingers were cool and smooth against his calloused skin. I know I've disrupted your life. If my being here is causing problems, it's not you, Ray said, and meant it. It's the world. The world has opinions about things it doesn't understand. Brooke withdrew her hand, but her eyes stayed on his face. At my level, you learn that the world's opinions are just noise. What matters is what you know to be true. And what do you know to be true, Miss Callahan? She smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one from magazine covers. I know that in 43 years, I've never felt more at home than I have on your lumpy couch, eating overcooked pasta with a man who mops floors for a living. Ray felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous. Brooke, he said, and her name felt foreign on his tongue, too intimate for the careful distance he'd been maintaining. I don't have anything to offer you. I live paycheck to paycheck. I own exactly one suit, and it's older than my daughter. I'm nobody. You're wrong, she said quietly. You're the first somebody I've met in a very long time. That night, after Penny had been tucked into bed with her stuffed rabbit and 3 bedtime stories, Ray found Brooke sitting on the fire escape outside the kitchen window. The rusted metal groaned under her weight, but she didn't seem to care. She was staring at the city lights, the same lights she used to look down on from 47 stories up. Now viewed from the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, Ray climbed through the window and settled beside her, the space so narrow their shoulders touched. Neither of them moved away. I had a miscarriage, Brooke said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. 8 years ago, Gregory wanted an heir, not a child. When I lost the baby, he looked at me like I'd failed an audit. Ray felt his heart clench. Brooke, I'm so sorry. Don't be. It made me realize what I'd married. A man who saw everything as a transaction. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the distant glow of streetlights. That's why I divorced him. Not the affairs, not the lies, the way he looked at me when I lost something precious. And all he saw was inconvenience. Ray didn't have words for that kind of pain. So he did the only thing he could think of. He reached over and took her hand, holding it loosely enough that she could pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. They sat there in silence, 2 people from different worlds, connected by the simple act of being present. Penny's mother left when she was 2, Ray said eventually. Maggie wanted a different life, a bigger life. I wasn't enough to make her stay. Then she was a fool. The conviction in Brooke's voice startled him. I've met men worth billions who don't have a fraction of what you have, Ray. The way your daughter looks at you, that's worth more than every penthouse in this city. Ray felt something unlock in his chest, a door he'd kept bolted for 5 years. I'm scared, he admitted. Of what? Of wanting something I can't have, of letting myself believe that this, he gestured between them, could be real. I'm just a guy who mops floors, Brooke. You're going to rebuild your penthouse and go back to your world, and I'll still be here, wondering if any of it actually happened. Brooke's grip on his hand tightened. What if I don't want to go back? The question hung in the night air, fragile and dangerous. Ray turned to face her, searching her expression for any sign that this was just the stress talking, the temporary insanity of displacement. But her eyes were clear, steady, certain. Then stay, he said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff. Stay, as long as you want. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, more beautiful than any magazine cover, any press photo, any carefully curated image. This was Brooke. Just Brooke, and she was choosing to be here, in his rusted fire escape, in his cramped apartment, in his messy, imperfect life. I think, she said slowly, I might want to stay for a very long time. Before Ray could respond, a small voice came from the window behind them. Daddy? Miss Brooke? I had a bad dream. They turned to find Penny rubbing her eyes, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. Without hesitation, Brooke opened her arms. Come here, sweetheart. We've got you. The confrontation came without warning. 3 weeks into Brooke's stay, Ray opened his front door on a Saturday afternoon to find a man standing on his porch. Expensive suit, cold eyes, a smile that didn't reach them. You must be the maintenance man, the man said. I'm Gregory Ashworth, Brooke's husband. Ex-husband, came Brooke's voice from behind Ray. She'd appeared in the hallway, face pale, jaw set in a hard line. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago, Gregory. You have no right to be here. Gregory's smile widened. I have every right, darling. Do you know how it looks? the CEO of Callahan Industries, shacking up with... He looked Ray up and down with undisguised contempt. The help? The board is concerned. Shareholders are concerned. I'm concerned. Ray felt his hands curl into fists. Behind him, he heard Penny's bedroom door creak open. She was listening, of course. She always listened. "I think you should leave," Ray said, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. Gregory laughed. "You think you can tell me what to do? You're nothing. A janitor playing house with a woman so far out of your league it's pathetic." He stepped closer, close enough that Ray could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp. "Let me tell you how this is going to go. You're going to pack Brooke's things. You're going to watch her walk out that door. And you're going to pray I don't have you fired before you make it to your next shift." "Gregory!" Brooke's voice cut through the tension. "This isn't about the company. This isn't about shareholders. This is about you not being able to stand that I found something you never gave me." "And what's that?" Gregory sneered. "A cramped apartment and a man who cleans toilets." "Peace," Brooke said. "Kindness. A 7-year-old who doesn't care about my net worth and a father who offered me warmth when I had nothing." She stepped forward, positioning herself beside Ray. "I'm not going anywhere." Gregory's face twisted. "Then you'll lose everything." The board will do what I tell them," Brooke said. "Because unlike you, I built something real. I didn't marry into it." The words landed like blows. Gregory's composure cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you." He turned and stalked toward a black car waiting at the curb. The door slammed, the engine revved, and then he was gone, leaving only the echo of his threats hanging in the air. Ray stood frozen, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Beside him, Brooke was shaking fine tremors that she was trying desperately to hide. "I should go," she whispered. "He's right. If I stay, he'll destroy you. Your job, your reputation, Brooke." Ray turned to face her. "I don't care. You should care. You have a daughter to think about, bills to pay, a life that doesn't include billionaire ex-husbands with vendettas." "And what about what I want?" The words came out rougher than he intended. "For 7 years, I've been invisible. I've mopped floors and fixed pipes and watched people walk past like I didn't exist. And then you..." He stopped, struggling to find the words. "You saw me. That night in your office, you saw me. Not the uniform, not the badge. Me. Ray, I'm not going to let some guy in an expensive suit take that away. I'm not going to let him take you away." He reached out, his calloused hand cupping her face with a gentleness that surprised them both. "Stay." Brooke's eyes glistened. "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking you to choose," Ray said. "Not between me and your company. Not between this apartment and your penthouse. Just choose what makes you feel alive. Choose whatever lets you breathe." A small voice came from the hallway. "Daddy?" They both turned. Penny stood in her doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide and worried. Is the angry man going to make Miss Brooke leave? Brooke knelt down, putting herself at eye level with the little girl. "What do you think, Penny? Should I leave?" Penny shook her head vigorously. "No. You're part of our family now. You have to stay for movie night." Brooke laughed a wet, broken sound. "Movie night. How could I miss that?" She looked up at Ray, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't dared hope for. A decision made. A door opened. "I'm staying," she said. The weeks that followed were a battleground. Gregory made good on his threats. Stories appeared in the press, painting Brooke as unstable, erratic, a woman who'd abandoned her responsibilities to play house with a working-class nobody. The board demanded emergency meetings. Shareholders called for her resignation. Ray received a termination notice exactly 4 days after Gregory's visit. "I'm sorry," his manager said, not sounding sorry at all. "Budget cuts." Ray cleaned out his locker in silence. 7 years of his life, reduced to a cardboard box of personal effects. He should have been devastated. Instead, he felt strangely free. Brooke didn't cry when he told her. She got angry. For 3 hours, she worked the phone, calling in favors, pulling strings, threatening legal action. Ray watched her pace the cramped living room, her corporate armor fully in place, and saw for the first time the warrior who'd built an empire from nothing. "I can get your job back," she said when she finally hung up. "I can make this go away." "I don't want it back," Ray said. Brooke stared at him. "What?" That job was a paycheck. It was security, but it was never mine. He smiled. "Maybe getting fired is the push I needed." "To do what?" "I don't know yet. Something real. Something Penny can be proud of." Brooke sat down beside him on the couch, their couch. He'd started thinking of it and took his hand. "I could help. Invest in whatever you decide to do." "No." Ray's response was immediate. "I need to do this myself. Whatever it is. I need to know I can stand on my own before I can stand next to you." The board meeting took place on a rainy Thursday. Brooke walked into that conference room with evidence that had taken her lawyers 2 weeks to compile records of Gregory's embezzlement, proof of his manipulation of company finances, documentation of harassment complaints that had been buried. Ray knew because she'd practiced her presentation in their kitchen, Penny serving as an audience of one while she demolished imaginary opponents. "He thought he could destroy me," Brooke said when she came home that evening, exhaustion and triumph warring on her face. "He forgot who he was dealing with. What happened?" "Gregory's facing criminal charges. The board unanimously reaffirmed my position." She kicked off her heels. She'd started leaving them by the door with Ray's work boots and Penny's light-up sneakers, and collapsed onto the couch. It's over. But it wasn't over. Not really. Because even after Gregory's downfall, even after the board's vote of confidence, something had changed. Ray saw it in the way Brooke looked at her phone when it buzzed with work notifications, the slight flinch, the momentary hesitation before she answered. He saw it in the way she held Penny a little tighter during their evening story time, as if afraid the little girl might disappear. Trauma didn't vanish just because the threat was gone. It lingered in the body, in the breath, in the spaces between heartbeats. One night, Ray woke to find Brooke's side of the bed empty. They'd started sharing the bedroom 2 weeks ago, after Penny had asked why Miss Brooke was still sleeping on the lumpy couch when Daddy's bed was big enough for 2. Out of the mouths of babes, he found Brooke on the fire escape again, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts, staring at the city lights. "Can't sleep?" he asked, climbing through the window to join her. "Too quiet," she said, which didn't make sense until it did. In her old life, there had always been noise, phones ringing, assistants hovering, the constant hum of empire maintenance. Here, the only sounds were distant traffic and the occasional creak of old pipes. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted. "For someone to tell me this isn't real, that I have to go back." Ray settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Go back to what?" "The penthouse. The 70-hour weeks. The dinners with people who smile at me while calculating my net worth." She laughed, but it was hollow. "I spent 20 years building that life, Ray, and now I can't remember why." "Maybe because it was never your life," he said gently. "Maybe it was just the life you thought you were supposed to want." Brooke turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the same time I realized that a 7-year-old's happiness matters more than a corner office." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You don't have to go back to anything, Brooke. You can build something new, something that actually fits." Ray sat beside her, pulling her against his chest. She fit there perfectly, her head tucked beneath his chin, her body finally releasing the tension it had carried for weeks. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Brooke said slowly, "I rebuild. The penthouse will take months to repair. Insurance, contractors, all of it." She tilted her head to look at him, but I was thinking, maybe I don't want to go back there. "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere with thin walls and noisy neighbors." somewhere with crayon drawings on the refrigerator and a dent in the couch. She smiled, and Ray felt his heart crack open, somewhere that echoes with laughter instead of silence. "That sounds crowded," Ray said, trying to keep his voice steady. 3 people in 800 square feet. "We'd manage." Brooke's hand found his. "We'd manage beautifully." 6 months later, Ray stood in front of a modest storefront, watching Penny press her nose against the window. The sign above the door was simple: Hollister Repairs, honest work at honest prices. It wasn't much, a small shop in a working-class neighborhood, offering handyman services to people who couldn't afford the big contractors. Ray had taken every penny of his savings, combined with the severance Brooke's lawyers had negotiated from the Callahan building, and built something of his own. "Daddy, can I put the sign in the window?" Penny asked, holding up a hand-drawn poster that read, "Grand opening today," in rainbow letters. "Absolutely." "Baby girl." Ray lifted her up so she could tape it to the glass. Behind them, a familiar car pulled up to the curb, not the luxury sedan Brooke's driver used, but a practical SUV she'd bought 3 months ago, declaring that she was done being chauffeured like a package. She emerged with coffee cups balanced in one hand and a bag of pastries in the other. "Morning rush fuel," she announced, kissing Ray's cheek before handing a hot chocolate to Penny. "Big day." "You didn't have to come," Ray said, though his smile betrayed how glad he was that she had. "Board meeting at 10. "Board meetings can wait. My family cannot." The word hung in the air between them, family still new enough to feel precious, old enough to feel true. Mrs. Patterson from the old apartment building was their first customer, arriving with a broken toaster and a knowing smile. "I always said you were too talented to be mopping floors," she told Ray, which was news to him since she'd mostly complained about the noise. By noon, Ray had 3 jobs scheduled for the week. By evening, he had enough to cover next month's rent on the shop. Not a fortune, not a windfall. Just the beginning of something built with his own 2 hands. "You know," Brooke said as they locked up for the night, Penny already half asleep in the car, "I made my first real money fixing problems nobody else wanted to touch. Started with a failing subsidiary everyone said was hopeless." "What did you do?" "Figured out what it actually needed, instead of what everyone assumed it needed. Turned out to be pretty simple once I stopped listening to the experts." She looked at the modest shop, at the hand-painted sign, at the man who'd offered her warmth when she had nothing. "Remind you of anyone?" Ray laughed softly. "I'm no turnaround specialist." "No. You're better." Brooke took his hand. "You're the man who saw a broken CEO and offered her a home, who faced down a billionaire in a cramped apartment and didn't blink, who got fired and treated it like freedom." She squeezed his fingers. "You fix things, Ray Hollister, not just pipes and wires. You fix things that matter." They drove home in comfortable silence, not to the cramped apartment anymore, but to a small house with a yard, 3 bedrooms, and thin walls that let them hear each other's laughter. Brooke still kept her position at Callahan Industries. Ray still worked with his hands. The newspapers had eventually moved on to other scandals, other stories. But sometimes, late at night, they would sit on their porch, a real porch, with steps that creaked and a swing that squeaked, and watch the stars emerge over a neighborhood that didn't know or care about board meetings and stock prices. "Daddy?" Penny's voice drifted from inside the house. "Miss Brooke, it's movie night." Ray stood, extending his hand to help Brooke up. "You heard the boss." Brooke took his hand, rising gracefully despite the simplicity of the gesture. "You know," she said, pausing at the door, "I used to think success meant having everything. The penthouse, the title, the view. And now?" She looked through the window at Penny, arranging pillows on the couch with elaborate precision, preparing for a night of animated movies and microwave popcorn. "Now I know success is having someone who waits for you to come home." She leaned up and kissed him, not the polished kiss of magazine covers, but the real kind. The kind that tasted like coffee and contentment, and the promise of ordinary days. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For joking about something that turned out not to be a joke at all." Ray smiled, remembering that night in her office, the ridiculous words that had tumbled from his mouth. "You could just move in. Best joke I ever told," he said, and together they walked inside, where the lights were warm and the laughter was loud and the walls held nothing but love. Outside, the city glittered on, indifferent to the small house with the creaky porch. But inside those walls, 3 people had built something no amount of money could buy, a family forged from chance encounters and second chances. From courage and kindness, from the simple truth that sometimes the biggest doors open with the smallest keys, and if you listened closely, past the sound of movie credits and a child's giggles, and 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, you might hear it. The echo of a penthouse, finally silent, finally at peace. Because somewhere across town, in a house that would never make the cover of a magazine, warmth had found its home at last.